Well, good evening and welcome to the History Sessions live stream broadcast with Ivan Bunn. I'm not Ivan, I'm Stephen from the Rogues Shanty Chorus, and we're hosting local author, historian, and respected knowledge on all things Lowestoft, Waveney, and Suffolk. And this is the third week that Ivan has joined us. If you've missed the first two, you can still see them. A lot of people have done so, and we're going to share the link in the stream tonight. But this evening, Ivan's actually got a lot that he'd like to kind of cover. I think in particular, Sparrow's Nest, the Battle of Lowestoft, and maybe even something about Samuel Peeps. If you're watching already, I can see we've had some comments, which is fantastic. So thank you very much. If you're watching, let us know that you're out there, won't you? We're coming to you from well, two locations, but most interestingly, Ivan is based in Lowestoft, and that's really the kind of town of interest that we have. And we're part of a wider project called the Unique Coastal Cultural and Musical Heritage of Waveney. And because of lockdown, our Shanty Chorus, which is a part of this project, because of lockdown, our Shanty Chorus couldn't meet. And so we took our rehearsals online and turned them into virtual rehearsals or broadcasts. And we had also been talking to Ivan about the possibility of delivering us some presentations or talks about various different aspects of his vast knowledge. And so we thought, well, why let lockdown stop that? So as I say, this is the third. The other two will be available to watch still. But yeah, let us know if you're out there. And I can see already that we're going to feature on screen her comment. Lauren Geraldine Lewis is the first commenter. So she says hello. We've also got Jackie Draper. Hi from Jackie and Barry. And Linda Boyce says hi everyone. Joseph Thompson says hello. Maggie Clark says hello and good evening. So I'm actually just going to bring in Ivan now. You can hear me, Ivan, can't you?
I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Good. Yeah, absolutely fine. Brilliant. So, Ivan, thanks for kind of being with us again. Last two sessions have been extremely popular. We've had people from literally from all over the world, from Canada, from Amsterdam, from Scotland, from the Midlands, all over Suffolk and East Anglia. Even week one, we had somebody from Australia staying up very late. It was like 3 a.m. And people are absolutely fascinated to find out more about your various kind of specialisms. And so tonight there's a lot to do, and I can see you've put me to shame with a tie and a shirt, and I'm just in a boring old t-shirt. But yeah, what are you thinking you might talk about this evening, Ivan?
Well, first of all, good evening, Stephen. Good evening, everybody out there. Yeah, an expert. I'm not trying to put you to shame, by the way. It's been nearly 4 months since I actually dressed up for anything. I thought I'm going to dress up tonight and put a clean white shirt on and wear a tie just for the sheer hell of it, to make me feel slightly more human again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got 2 or 3 items lined up. Hopefully we'll have time to fit them all in. There will be sort of halfway through, I'm going to give a brief history of the Sparrow's Nest Park in Lowestoft. It's from a much longer presentation that I do to a live audience. Well, not that you're dead, but you know, in the flesh, so to speak. Get it down a little bit to make I'm also aware of the fact we might have people watching and listening who are unaware of exactly what Sparrow's Nest is, where it is in Lowestoft. So I'm going to talk about that. I've also, did I hear you mention Maggie?
Yes, Maggie Clark.
Maggie, are you the young lady who asked me about Charles Barkaway last week?
So Maggie, we were talking about this before we went live, and we think it's you that asked about Major Charles Barkaway, but would you let us know in the comments, because Ivan took a question and I think he kind of partly answered it, but as he has done with some of the other sessions, he's gone off and found a bit more. So if it is you, would you let us know? Because if the person who asked the question is watching, then that's obviously encouraging.
Okay, right. Yeah, fingers crossed the right person, or the right person shows up in a while.
Oh, yeah, so Ivan, she's already said yes, it was her.
Oh, okay, right. Hello, Maggie. I haven't got a lot of information, but I knew somewhere down the line the name had cropped up in some research that I'd done into salvage work off Lowestoft in the 19th century. And I came across an article in the Lowestoft Journal. I tracked him the sailings of, he owned a vessel, a brigantine called the Bootswain. It was a collier plying between here and South Shields. He was the owner and the master, the captain, if you like, and he was certainly sailing just about every week from Lowestoft up to North Shields in ballast, taking on cools, bringing them back to Lowestoft, along with literally hundreds and hundreds of other coastal colliers. If you think about it, the main, throughout the kingdom, the main source of fuel was coal. And we had a tremendous amount of colliers. I know from another work that I did, some research that I did, I'm trying to think of the year, 1866. This is sad, I know, but I went through the register of every single boat arriving in Lowestoft, and in that year, over 700 colliers came to unload their cools in the town, sometimes 2 or 3 in a week.
Wow.
So he was running that cool train. And the interesting thing that I found was, it was in the Lowestoft Journal, January 1895. Apparently, in some pretty rough weather, he was sailing the collier, the boatswain, Bootswain. I don't know how you pronounce that. They usually say Booston, don't they?
Bosun,
But
yeah.
it's definitely spelled. Yeah, it's spelled Bootswain, the original old-fashioned way. Boatswain, the Bootswain. That was the name of his boat. He was coming in, trying to get into Lowestoft Harbour, and he was driven ashore on the Newcombe Sands, one of the sandbanks that are notorious just off the coast of Lowestoft, in fact, all along this coast. And what happened was 2 small boats sailed out from the beach at Lowestoft, and they assisted him to get off the sandbank and brought him into port, a bit damaged. And also a local steam tug went out and pulled him off as well. Now, these, I'll go into a little bit more detail about what this is, but it was 2 beach companies in Lowestoft. They were companies of fishermen. They had a big hut, a shod as they called it, that they drank their tea in, and probably stronger stuff as well, where they weren't at sea. There was the old company of beachmen and the new company of beachmen. And what they would do, they had boats ready. If anybody got into difficulties, they would go out and help rescue them. Partly because they would tell the seamen they were rescuing, but also because they could then claim salvage money off the. I don't think they're quite the same as the Cornish wreckers. I don't think the Cornish wreckers would actually entice vessels onto the beach and rocks to wreck them so they could get the salvage from them. They weren't wreckers in that sense, but they were salvage. They were fishermen who knew the waters well. They would go out and they would board the boat. Sometimes the boat that's aground, they would board it and pilot it if necessary, tow up. And if they couldn't manage, the local tug would come and pull the boat in. And that's what happened to Captain Charles Barkaway's boat. The only thing was, he claimed, or the beachman claimed, salvage rights of £250, which back then was a lot of money. You could basically buy a boat for that. And so Charles Barkaway challenged this, and he took the salvagers to court, and they had an inquiry in Lowestoft, and in the end, the justices of the peace, the magistrates, decided that £250 was far too much to pay in salvage money, and he awarded the men £25, which was probably much nearer the mark. that's the only thing that I've been able to find about him. I think possibly, perhaps he decided to retire at that point. You gave me the year for 1894. This is in 1892, December the 14th. Interestingly enough, when they took sailings after that date out of Lowestoft, his boat, the boatswain, is no longer mentioned. So possibly he decided enough was enough. Perhaps it was too expensive to get the vessel repaired. And so I don't know how old he was at that time. You might have a lot more information about his background than this, but certainly that's a microcosm of one of the incidents, one of many, many incidents, including that included salvage of stranded vessels off Lowestoft. So if you want all the more details, I won't go on too long about it, Maggie. You can find me on Facebook, Ivan Bunn, as simple as that. If you send me a message, I'll get all the detail of the case and the other times his ship sailed. And if you want them, I'll certainly let you have them. With good grace, you can have the information for nothing. I can point you in the direction of where you might find some more. So anyway, that's Charles Barkaway. So that little bell that tingled in the back of my head last week did pay off. I hope that is some information that you don't have.
Well, Ivan, Maggie's just actually commented saying, I have a photo of the boatswain or the boatswain. So maybe she could send it to you. Yeah.
Mm.
And actually, just although we might be going off on a tangent here, Ivan, I know you were talking about the kind of the salvage operations, but as I understood it, that was part of the reason that the RNLI came into being, wasn't it? Was to give a slightly more honourable intention to boat rescuing, because Lowestoft was one of the first RNLI stations in the country, which was in 1901, and prior to that, the RNLI was known as, it was a much longer title. It was something like the National Society for the Preservation of Life in Shipwreck or something like that. And I think Lowestoft beachmen were known as that's how they got their nickname, the Longshore Sharks. Is that right?
Well, the thing is, I'm trying to think the name. The original lifeboat at Lowestoft. I'm going to have to make this a subject the next week.
Sorry, I've gone off. There
was a lifeboat at Lowestoft in the early 1800s, paid for by public subscription, and there was a society set up to run that, and it was crewed. Now, they didn't, as far as I understand, claim salvage money. They're not like the beachmen. They went out to save lives, but they were recompensed out of the society's funds. So right. They kind of, the beachmen were kind of, I'm sure, following a very long tradition of going out and salvage from them. So you have a period when the lifeboat will go out and save lives. They're not particularly interested in salvaging the boat. So the beachmen will come along with them or after them and try and get the boat ashore or into harbour so they can claim the salvage money.
Yeah.
So you've got the two things running. And of course, eventually the salvage side stops. And sometimes there was fights between the beachmen. I found one or two press reports where 20 beachmen have gone out to try and salvage a ship and have tried to board it. And the master of the ship doesn't want to be salvaged because he knows it's going to cost him or his company money. And there's fights break out, and the salvage go back to the beach and come back with the stones and start throwing stones at the crew of the vessel and trying to get on board. There's quite a lot of that goes on. as I say, they're not to be compared with the Cornish wreckers who purposely went to entice ships onto rocks to get the salvage from them. These are taken natural events and trying to turn them into a profit-making venture, if you like. But of course, it didn't always go down well with the owners of the vessels, particularly if the vessel, like Mr. Barker way, not only was he the skipper, the master, but he also owns it, and everything on board is his. That's his whole livelihood wrapped up in that one boat.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I've just had another comment, Ivan, come in, just featured it on screen. It says, it's from Maggie again, and she put, "That's great, thank you." So, Maggie, as Ivan said, if you want to connect with him on Facebook, you can send him that picture and he can share some more information direct to you. So, well, brilliant. Thank you, Ivan.
Okay, right. So that's the first item on the agenda. I've gone through some, there's a wonderful book. I made a decision every time I do this, don't know how many we'll do, I'll recommend a book that being a fishing port, a small fishing port, a seaside town with a very, very long maritime history. A book that I would recommend to anybody who's interested in not just Lowestoft, but our maritime history, is this one. It's called The Anglo-Dutch Wars, and it's a very concise history. People don't realize that for between 1652 and 1674, we went to war with the Dutch 3 times, and we had some massive battles. The Battle of the Medway, around here, everybody knows the Battle of Sole Bay off Southwold, which was another big battle. And there was a battle, it's gone a little bit forgotten about, I think, sometimes, but there is a battle, well, there was a battle, became known as the Battle of Lowestoft. It wasn't in Lowestoft, it was 40 miles to the east of the town, and it took place on the 3rd of June in the year 1665. Okay, so that's 355 years ago, if my math is right. It was a very big encounter between the Dutch fleet and the English fleet. And I did a little bit of research into the battle. We have a picture of the battle itself that hopefully Stephen can pop up on the screen for me. There we are. That's a picture taken at the height of the battle. And just a few, little bit more information about it. I'm not an expert on naval history or naval warfare. So it started about 7 o'clock in the morning, and there was a fair number of ships. There was the English fleet contained 109 ships, carrying between them 4,542 cannon and 22,055 men, divided into 3 squadrons. The Dutch fleet was slightly smaller, 103 ships carrying slightly more guns, 4,869 guns, and manned by slightly less men, 21,613 men. They sailed in a rather more old-fashioned way. They had 7, those ships were divided into 7 squadrons. And apparently it was one hell of a fight. It started at 7 o'clock in the morning and continued just off the coast here, 40 miles out, all day. And it wasn't until nearly 9 o'clock that evening that the Dutch were finally defeated and fled the scene. And during the battle, one of the admirals leading the fleet, his name was Tromp, not Trump, but Tromp, T-R-O-M-P. He was killed when his flagship blew up and everybody on board it was killed. So this is a little snapshot done by, I think, a Dutch artist, you can see on the screen, showing the battle at its height. The losses were very, very one-sided. The British had one warship captured and had 500 men killed and wounded. The Dutch lost 2,500 men wounded, 2,000 captured, 8 warships were sunk, and 9 warships were captured. So basically, they had flattened the Dutch then. But the Duke of York, who was the admiral in charge, later to become James II of England, for some reason he didn't chase the Dutch fleet and furled their sails, and they didn't chase after the defeated Dutch. And so, although they won the battle, if you like, they didn't. They lost the war because the Dutch were able to regroup and the next year attack the British fleet in the Medway, and he got his knuckles rapped a little bit for that. So that was the Dutch fleet, as I said, was defeated. One of the captains on one of the warship, HMS Plymouth, was a Lowestoft man, one of our number of maritime big names who were born and grew up in Lowestoft. This was Captain Thomas Allen, and he was on the 56-gun third-rate frigate called HMS Plymouth. There's the man himself. This is Sir Thomas, Captain Thomas Allen, and he served with great distinction during the battle. He lived on the High Street in Lowestoft. I've just the numbers. There's 2 houses on the site of his, 29 and 30, the High Street, if my memory serves me right, is where he lived. After the battle, he was promoted to Admiral and was knighted and became Baronet Blunderston, in actual fact, was his title, and he became Sir Thomas Allen. The portrait of him that you see on the screen was one of 13 that were painted after this great victory, all painted at the same time, the same year, 1666, the following year. And it's the portrait, the painter was obviously the famous Sir Peter Lely. And it's one of 13 portraits, most of which still exist. And the series is known as the Flag Men of Lowestoft. So he was one of the flag men of Lowestoft that earned his honours in the as an admiral, and he served with distinction for years and years. When the reference library, the record office at Lowestoft finally reopens, his diaries have all been published. There's 2 large volumes of his diaries that, again, if you're interested in naval history, especially its association with local men, the big names of Lowestoft, if you like, I would recommend that you know it's the diaries of Sir Thomas Allen. That's Allen spelled A-L-L-I-N. Okay, so he eventually retired, purchased Somerleyton Hall, and his descendants lived there until I think I'm right in saying not a direct line, but his descendants were there until Samuel Morton Peto bought the hall in 1844. So that's Sir Thomas Allen. The battle has been commemorated in the Royal Navy by naming warships HMS Lowestoft, and there have been 8 of them in total. The last one, which I think we have a photograph of coming up on the screen, the last one was HMS Lowestoft. Here she is. She was a Type 12 Rothsay class anti-submarine frigate. Sorry, again, I'm not actually well into naval stuff. She was launched on the 23rd of June in 1960. And I'm sure many people like myself who grew up in the town can remember that the town adopted HMS Lowestoft and the one prior to her. I'm not much sure about the 6 before them. As I said, there's been HMS Lowestoft. She was the last one. And every year she would come, and she was too big to get into the harbour. She would anchor in the roads just outside Lowestoft, and the men would come ashore. There would be the mayor would have there would be parties. People would be, if the weather was calm enough, people would be ferried out by boat to visit the warship. So it's been a long association with HMS Lowestoft, which of course leads us right back to that battle. Now, HMS Lowestoft eventually was sunk on the 8th of June 1986, and believe it or not, she was sunk by a torpedo. I have a wonderful picture of her being torpedoed, which I hope will pop up on the screen. There she is. That's sad to say, that's the demise of HMS Lowestoft, sunk by a torpedo on the 8th of June 1986. Before you say, hang on a minute, we weren't at war with anybody in 1986. No, she had been scrapped. She had been replaced by newer models of frigates, and they decided that they would test one of their new Tiger, I think it was a Tiger torpedo on her, and she was hit by one torpedo and sank very, very quickly. So that's the rather ignominious end of HMS Lowestoft, and the last of her line, or the last of her name. Hopefully, perhaps one day we will get another HMS Lowestoft. It's sad to see her being blown up like that, but perhaps it's a more fitting end for a warship to be blown up like that, testing a new weapon, than actually being taken to a dockyard and chopped to pieces and scrapped. So that's HMS Lowestoft. Now, before we move on to my next little bit, and it is linked, if you can imagine these guns, we've got 8,000, 9,000 cannon on these ships, just 40 miles north of the east of the town here, hammering hell out of each other. The noise was incredible, and I wasn't here. I'm not that old. The reason we know it was incredible, nobody has left an account of it in the town, but it must have been incredible because it could be heard. The sound of the guns of the Battle of Lowestoft could be heard in London. The poet John Dryden, in his diary, said that they could hear the rattle of the guns and in London, and you could hear them best out in the middle of the Thames. So he got a boatman to row him out into the middle of the Thames and then rest his oars so it was quiet. And he says, it was not long ere they perceived the air to break about them like the noise of distant thunder, or quite perhaps because he's a poet, the noise of the guns in the distance sounded like swallows in the chimney. I've never heard a swallow in the chimney. Because the other guy, the wonderful diarist, Samuel Peeps, I have the complete set, 12 volumes. He's one of my favourite dippable reads, is Peeps. Wonderful guy, love him. I got all 12 volumes up the back there behind me. He records in his diary, and I think we have a picture of Mr. Peeps as well. He records in here, there's Samuel. He was 32 years old at the time, and he was a clerk, a quite important clerk working for the Admiralty, and he was very, very interested in naval affairs. He knew from dispatches that probably at the beginning of June, the Dutch and the British fleets would meet in the North Sea, and he writes in his diary, all this day, by all people upon the river and almost everywhere else hereabouts, we heard the guns, our two fleets for certain being engaged. So if he could hear the guns down in London, along with Dryden and hundreds, if not thousands, of other people. The cacophony of noise just from 40 miles out must have been absolutely incredible, actually, in Lowestoft, and and quite frightening, I should think, as well. We know that one or two of the wounded were brought ashore in Lowestoft, according to Peeps in his diary. I'm going to stay with Peeps for a little while. I'm checking the watch, got plenty of time before I go on to take questions and then hopefully do the Sparrows Nest talk. Reading through the 3rd of June, 1665 in Peeps' diary, I noticed I sort of skimmed forwards and backwards again to see if there's any other notes about the battle, which there was, but it was more administrative stuff that he was dealing with. But I noticed that on the 7th of July, a parallel that with something that's happening today. The reason I'm sitting here today talking to you, the reason that you're sitting there, the trepidation, the worry, no doubt the fear that's gone not just through this country but around the world with this coronavirus epidemic. And I suddenly read and I suddenly realized that on the 7th of June, only 4 days after he had been on the river listening to the sound of the guns, Peeps writes in his diary, I did in Drury Lane see 2 or 3 houses marked with a red cross upon the doors, and Lord have mercy upon us writ there. It put me in a state of ill conception of myself. This, I suddenly realized, he was witnessing the beginning of the Great Plague that hit London in 1665. And so I wanted to read, I hadn't really thought anything about this. I tracked his diary the following year through the Great Fire of London, which he writes copiously about, obviously. But I started to pick up notes, and I wanted to see if I could kind of draw parallels with how we feel today, or how I felt and still feel about this COVID-19 virus that is decimating so many people. And so 10 days, 3 days after he made that entry, he made a note that the plague was increasing in the city. On the 17th of June, he wrote, it struck me very deep this afternoon. The coachman found to drive easily. At last, he stood still and came down, hardly able to stand, and told me that he was struck very sick. And I was troubled for myself, lest he should have been struck with the plague. God have mercy on us all. 3 days later, he's writing on the 20th of June, there died 4 or 5 at Westminster of the plague in one alley of several houses. Yet people do think that number will be fewer. That's kind of the optimism that I think some of us felt at the beginning of this outbreak, which really has no parallel death-wise with the, and that's not to take anything away from the unfortunate people who have died and people who have lost loved ones during our COVID-19 pandemic. But he says, yet people do think that the number, that's the number dying, will be fewer in the town than it was last week. By the 20th of June, they were keeping a tally. They were called bills of mortality. They'd always kept them in London. London at that time had, Greater London, including the city, had a population of 300,000 people. By the 20th of June, when he made that entry, 112 people had died of the plague. By the following week, 168 had died. And on the 29th of June, he writes, the end of this end of the town, that's where he lived, every day grows very bad of the plague. The mortality bill is come to 267, which is about 19 more than last week. In July, I've skipped some of the bits that he wrote. He puts 20th of July 1665, walk to Redriff, where I hear the sickness is. Indeed, it is scattered almost everywhere. There have been 1,089 dying of the plague this week. But Lord, to see how the plague spreads. 8th of August, the streets mighty empty all the way now, which is a strange sight. To Westminster Hall, hearing very sad stories that Will, that used to sell ale at the hall door, his wife and 3 children, all dead. All in, I think, a day. 2 days later, he's really, really worried about his health, whether he's got to survive, and he goes back to his house and office in Seething Lane, and to the office where we sat all morning in great trouble to see the bill of dead rise to 3,000 of the plague, home to draw up a new will. The town growing so unhealthy that a man cannot depend upon living 2 days in a row. And then they have basically a form of lockdown. The Admiral decide that he need only go to work at his office in Seething Lane on a Thursday to get his work done. He starts to do most of his work from home. They were trying, houses were locked up. If you had somebody die of the plague in your house was locked and you weren't allowed out of it. At first they guarded them, but in the end they could not enforce that rule anymore. And the Lord Mayor of London on the 12th of August made a decree. My Lord Mayor commands people to be within their houses at 9 at night. All that the sick may have liberty to go abroad for air. So what he was saying was, if you're well, don't mix with the people who are probably sick with the plague. Stay indoors after 9 o'clock. But then the people who are possibly suffering from the plague or have caught the plague, they can go out and walk the streets and take a bit of air without mingling with the well people. But this really didn't work. August 16th, he writes, how sad a sight it is to see the streets empty of people. And jealous, by that, it's an old word, it actually means frightened or very aware of, and jealous of every door that one sees shut up, lest it should be the plague. And about us, 2 shops in 3, if not more, all generally shut up. So the businesses are closed down. One day he goes out to try and get some food and he can't find a baker's, a butcher's, or any provision shop. And he has to wait till he get home that evening and find something in the, well, I was going to say in the fridge, something in the cupboard that he could eat. By this time, his wife, who was living with him in London, in Axyard, he sent her right down the river with his mum. He had no children, to lodge at Woolwich, which was an area unaffected by the plague, but he stayed in London. On the 30th of August, he writes, Lord, how everybody looks and discourses in the street is of death and nothing else, and few people going up in town. The town, by the town, obviously, he means the city, the town is like a place distressed and forsaken. And he goes on, the following day, after walking the empty streets, he decides to move to see his wife and stay with his wife in Woolwich, and only commute back to the city by river when he really has to go to his office or something. And he writes that same day, the plague having increased this week beyond all expectations of almost 2,000. Every day, sadder and sadder news of the increase. In the city this week, in the city died this week 6,102 of the plague. And as I said, he's now living basically at Woolwich, but going back and forwards. And I thought this was rather sad, a little bit funny in a way, but it just shows how worried he was about things. He loved to dress smart, and on the 3rd of September, he's at Woolwich with his wife, and he says, "Up and put on my coloured silk suit, very fine, and my new periwig, bought a good while since, but durst not wear it, because the plague was in Westminster when I bought it." So he'd bought a wig and a new suit of clothes, hadn't worn them. He bought them during the plague period when it was possibly at its height. When he went to put them on, he was so scared that whatever was causing the plague might be in his wig or his clothes. He decided not to put them on. After that, he goes on to give a very long account of what he'd seen and experienced and how it worried and depressed him. And adding, and I thought, here's the human touch coming through. But I put off the thoughts of sadness as much as I can to keep my wife in good heart and my family also. And on the 20th of September, he writes, "Lord," he goes back to the city to go to his office. He puts, "Lord, what a sad time it is to see no boats upon the river, and the grass grow up and down Whitehall. The number of the plague this week is increased by 600. It's more than last week. It's now gone up to 7,615 people dying in 1 week, which is very grievous to us all." At the end of the following week, the plague total starts to drop to 5,533 a week, that particular week. And on the 3rd of October, Peeps noted, "Sir George Smith comes to me at the office and tells me how the plague has decreased by 740 deaths, for which God be praised." This took the total number of deaths down that week to 4,929, and by the end of the month, the total death toll dropped down to 1,031. The winter apparently was responsible for that. And by the end of December, there was few people dying of the plague. I thought I'd share that with you, as they say, because I just felt like a kind of a kindred spirit with the guy. The total number is reckoned at 70,000 people in that period from June to December died in a city of 300,000 people. It's hell of a but judged by other people who've researched into the plague, apparently many people, if they had somebody in their house who died of the plague, they didn't report it as a plague death, because if they had done that, they'd been locked up in the house. And the experts reckon that a conservative figure, the number of deaths in a short period of time, was nearer 100,000 people out of a city containing 300,000 people. It makes you wonder if back then this coronavirus had hit then, what the death toll might have been. And I think that's why we have so much thanks to give during this crisis that we're going through. To thank to all the support workers, the NHS, the doctors, the nurses, and everybody who tried to, and I'm certain they have, kept this into some manageable proportions. Right, that's me on Samuel Pepys and the plague.
Well, and thank you, Ivan. Absolutely fascinating. And yeah, like you say, just the kind of the parallels between coronavirus and but although you did point out something earlier, you said the only difference is that we're not tripping over corpses in the street as they would
he was. And the other thing I should point out as well, he lived in the more upmarket. He actually lived in the city. He lived at Axe Yard, which is not far from Tower Hill. It's just there's a big Merchant Navy memorial there, and behind that is the Admiralty buildings, and behind that, because he worked for the Admiralty, behind that there was a small little street called Axe Yard, and that's where he lived. But that was the upmarket part of London, a much bigger house spread out. It was the poorer parts within the city and outside the parishes, just outside the city walls, were cramped, and where the poorest housing were. That's where the greatest death toll came from. Every bill of mortality lists every single death for a week in the whole area of London, how many died of what, and then there's a parish by parish breakdown. So if you love statistics, even rather morbid statistics like that, you could build up some wonderful databases and spreadsheets of the statistics from that period. So anyway, that's me with Samuel Peeps and his just looking at my right. Anybody got anything they want to add or ask? Not that I'm much of an expert on it, but
no. Well,
I just love everything historic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to feature a few comments. Several people said thank you very much. That was really interesting, fascinating. There's a comment on screen there from Anita. Yeah, that was a really interesting talk. But I'm actually going to go back. This was, I think, you talking about HMS Lowestoft earlier, and Janice said, "Hey, Ivan, regards HMS Lowestoft. All those young girls wanted to touch a sailor's collar for luck." I don't know if that was a superstition or something.
I have heard of that. Yeah, I suppose I hadn't thought of that. Not being a young girl in Lowestoft when they were here, I didn't particularly want to touch stuff.
No, exactly. Yeah, or maybe that's just some excuse that they just wanted to get up close to a sailor.
Perhaps it is.
Yeah,
I can't. That rings a bell.
Yeah, but another comment.
How many sailors?
Sorry, Ivan, say again.
I was going to say, Janice, how many sailors' collars did you get to touch?
Oh, I think I know. Yeah, I know Janice, and I think she touched a few. I've got to say. So another message now from Barry, although it comes across as from Jackie. It says HMS Lowestoft was torpedoed by HMS Conqueror. Then in 1982, the Conqueror sunk the, and I think he actually means the Belgrade.
The Belgrano.
Belgrano, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't realise the torpedo was being fired by Conqueror. I knew that it was a tigerfish torpedo, not a tiger torpedo. And I think they were trying these new torpedoes out, and poor HMS Lowestoft got zonked. As I said, I love sort of naval history, but I'm not that knowledgeable about it. But again, going back to the Battle of HMS, the Battle of Lowestoft, if you're interested in the Dutch Wars, that book about the Dutch Wars is certainly worth reading. It's very, very well written.
Yeah.
And nicely illustrated as well.
So a couple more comments. The one from Chris Collins says, "Thanks, Ivan. Very interesting." And then Janice is replying to us. Janice says, "Ivan, I was too young to. I think it was a chat up." So yeah, I think that probably was. It was just an excuse to get up and close to close and personal to a sailor. Well, so I'm just going to take a moment actually just to remind you what we're doing here, and if you haven't been with us since the beginning, just kind of mention what we're up to. So my name's Stephen, and I'm actually here on behalf of the Rogue Shanty Chorus, and we're actually part of a cultural heritage project which works across Lowestoft, Waveney, and North Suffolk, and it's called the Unique Coastal, Cultural, and Musical Heritage of Waveney. And that project sees us usually work with young people, teenagers, and very young people, but also we have an authentic fishing choir. And when lockdown started, we actually found that we had to suspend all our projects because it just wasn't safe for our people to meet. And so immediately we actually launched some virtual rehearsals which started to happen in place of, or in lieu of, what our physical rehearsals should have been. So on a Tuesday evening, when we should have been rehearsing, we started to actually just send out some broadcasts, which kind of evolved into something a bit further, and we've done those every single week since. And I think we're about to do the 12th broadcast tomorrow. So we're doing that at the moment while we're in lockdown. We're doing that every Tuesday evening at 7:30 p.m. on this page. So please do join us tomorrow for that. It will be shanties, sea songs, other folk music. We have a special guest, and then we talk a little bit about the songs themselves and the provenance. Importantly, the provenance of whether they were sung locally, and some information about that. If you wanted to find out more about those, you can see them all on the page. You can watch them all the live versions you can watch again. And what are we doing here? Well, so we had been liaising with Ivan to do a presentation or some talks for us about the history of Lowestoft and Waveney and Suffolk. And Ivan is a local author, a historian, and a bit of a legend, really. And he's the authority on a lot of various subjects, but he knows an awful lot about Lowestoft. And we had, as I say, we had been liaising with him to come and do some talks and presentations. Most likely they would be in a theatre, but obviously lockdown stopped that happening. But we didn't want to let lockdown have the final say on Ivan offering out some information, and so we've arranged for Ivan to do these history sessions. So at the moment, these are happening on a Monday evening at 7:30 p.m. This is the third one, as you can see just above me, and the previous two you can actually catch again. So obviously the best thing really ideally to do is watch them live, because if you have any questions or comments for Ivan, we can read them out and hopefully get them answered. But if you can't be with us live and watch the session there and then, you can still watch it, and they've been very popular indeed. Actually, we've had up to, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 people watch each of the previous two videos, and comments from Amsterdam, Scotland, the Midlands, Australia, Canada. So we're certainly very excited and fortunate to be hosting Ivan, and Ivan's been talking this evening about a wonderful couple of subjects, but he's not finished yet. So Ivan, I'm going to bring you back into the main screen, and there you go.
Okay.
A couple more comments actually I'm going to feature. One is from Maggie saying, Ivan has made me want to read Samuel Pepys' diary. Well, yeah, do that when you
do that.
Carly says, thank you, loved tuning into these each week, learning so much, thank you. Chris Collins says, acquire, wow. Yeah, Chris, so just a bit more information on that. I'm hijacking Ivan's session now, but we run an authentic fishing choir called the Rogues Shanty Chorus, and usually we would meet at the Seagull Theatre in Pigfield, Lowestoft, and because we can't, we're doing some virtual rehearsals, which have kind of evolved into broadcast. So we will be here tomorrow evening at 7:30. If you're available, please do join us. Yeah. One more comment from Anita. She says, sorry, Stephen and Ivan, I have to bow out for now as the phone is ringing. Bye for now. Thanks for joining us, Anita, and for the comments as well. Okay, that's it, Ivan. I'm going to hand it back over to you. Sorry.
What we're going to do now, and we're going to try and do another short history presentation about Lowestoft. 2 or 3 people got in touch either at the end of the last session or during the last week and said, how about history of Sparrow's Nest in Lowestoft? So I have one. I've tweaked it a little bit. I've shortened it. This is going to take about half an hour, if you've all got half an hour to spare. And I just got to set my thing here up. Yeah, there's thumbs up from the man in charge. So I'm just going to move, excuse me, do you like my tie? I'm going to move this and put it in front of my laptop. You just have to bear with me now. I hope you can all hear me still. Right, just get that in the middle. Oh, yeah. How's that looking for your end, Steve?
Looks perfect, Ivan.
All right. Hopefully that's going to take some glare. Right, you won't have to look at me now. I hope you can see the screen okay. I hope I haven't got to make any adjustments. Let's loosen my tie, it's getting warm. Okay, so this is a brief history of Sparrow's Nest. Sparrow's Nest, I should say, being a Lowestoft man. I'm not going to go right through to the present day. This is taken from a much longer 2-part presentation that I've done at the Seagull Theatre in Lowestoft, where I cover Bellevue Park as well. And so I'm going to start work through until 1913 and the outbreak of the First World War, the history of the park. So for people who are not in Lowestoft, I thought it might be an idea just to tell you what Sparrow's Nest is and where it is, and if you come to Lowestoft, what a nice place it is to visit. So here's some photographs. I went out and took them this afternoon. You can see we're very, very aware of distancing in Lowestoft. The park wasn't packed with people as I thought it would be. These are a few shots that I took 2:30 this afternoon, and I'm sure just about every Lowestoft person would agree with me. That's a wonderful, wonderful park that we have, and we're lucky to have it. It's literally within 2 minutes walk of the sea, sits below the cliffs at the very north end of Lowestoft. I put a map up here. This is 1903 map, and it's the park as it looked just after it opened. And if I just do this and put a red line around it, that's the boundaries of the modern park. So it's right at the north end of the north of the town, although the town is joined up with the adjoining parish of Gunton now. But back in the day, it was really at the extreme northeastern corner of the parish and the town of Lowestoft. Over on the, I don't know if my pointer works on here or not. Oh, yeah, it does, yeah. So here, the sea is just there, and there's the park, and there's our lighthouse. Okay, so I'm going to go right back in time now, and we know that there, and it all centers around a house and a small estate. Why is it called Sparrow's Nest? Because the small estate that would eventually become Sparrow's Nest and was the country home of this very wealthy gentleman. He didn't live in Lowestoft, he lived in Whirlingham Hall, not far from the town to the west, but he purchased his seaside maritime residence. Very, very wealthy man. When he died, his estate was worth over £300,000, born 1742 and died in 1822. Robert Sparrow, and that's why it's Sparrow's Nest. So a word of warning if you come to Lowestoft and you're not aware of it, it's not the Sparrow's Nest, it's Sparrow's Nest, the nest that belongs to our Sparrow here. Okay, so where can we trace its history back to? The earliest reference that we've got to a building there, and we know, and I won't go into the details, for local people who are familiar with the area, you'll see the score there, Gunton score. That's actually what today is the ravine, and the lookout and signal mast is approximately where the lighthouse stands today. This is a very stylistic detail from a much, much bigger plan, about 1580. And you can see there is a very large house, or a large house at the foot of the cliff here. And this is almost certainly either what would become the Cliff House, as it was known, Cliff Cottage, or an earlier house that stood on the site. So you can see those houses there that you can see are the extreme northern houses of the town. After that, there are no more houses. I'm not going to go decade by decade. We don't have the time. So I want to deal with Robert Sparrow's ownership of it and how it changed. So on the 17th of October 1796, Thomas Woodthorpe of Blunderston sold the property to Robert Sparrow of Whirlingham, Esquire, and it's described as a messuage and tenements below the hill called Lighthouse Hill. This is Lighthouse Hill here. Below the hill called Lighthouse Hill, with the garden ground and land now in the use of occupation of Henry Nicker, that's a wonderful surname to have, Henry Nicker, William Knights and William Foreman. So that's the park as we know it today, the green area. But of course, it wasn't like that when Mr. Sparrow purchased it. This is actually what he purchased, just that small area. So you can see the house in the top on the left-hand side of the green area. That would become Cliff Cottage. That's possibly the site of the house on that old print from the 16th century. But the constituent parts, oh, and the red dotted line at the top left hand corner, that's the boundary between Lowestoft and thereby Gunton. So you can see how close Sparrows is actually to the ancient parish of Gunton. And these areas of land, which would become part of the Sparrow estate, they weren't at the time he bought the estate. That was wasteland, common land belonging to the lord of the manor. In the top, well, we've called the northwestern, the top left-hand corner of that piece of land, there was a fish house, a house with fish houses, and to the north of that, there was 4 acres, just over 4 acres of land that went with it as well. Sparrow didn't buy those, of course, because he only bought the green area. The fish houses, there was another suite of fish houses there. And here was another piece of land been owned by the Wild family for many, many years, and it had been endowed to the church as a charity land, the money for which was to arising from the rent of that little piece of land was to provide bread for the poor of Lowestoft. And I think one more, just to put it into context, that's the site of the lighthouse. This is where the present lighthouse still stands. So that's the area that he purchased. Now he died on the 20. Can you see my deliberate mistake there? He died on March the 8th, 22. He died on March the 8th, 1822, and his will was approved at London on the March the 30th, 1822. There's the probate copy of his will, 17 pages long. He had estates all over this country and quite a lot of land that he owned in Ireland. All his property, land and estates, not just at Lowestoft, were put in the hands of 2 trustees, held in trust. Archibald, the Earl of Gosford, who was married to his own, Mr. Sparrow's only daughter, and Dawson Turner, who was a very wealthy and well-to-do banker from Great Yarmouth. They held the property in trust for Robert Sparrow's daughter, and she was to have the income from all the lands, which meant that Archibald, Earl of Gosford, probably benefited quite a lot out of that, as he was married to her. So that's the estate after Robert Sparrow died. But we know, and again, sometimes you find interesting facts quite by chance. I found this a press cutting in the Lowestoft Journal, the 25th of November, 1899, the obituary for Georgina, Marchioness of Salisbury, who was First Lady. She was the Prime Minister's wife, and she died, but there was a note in that press cutting you probably can't read, but you'll have to take my word for it, that tells us her father was this Edward Hall Alderson, 1787, died in 1857, and he actually lived in the after Robert Sparrow died, he became tenant of the house in which would become Cliff Cottage within the Sparrow's Nest. He actually lived there with his wife and their little girl, Georgina Alderson, as she was then, about 3 years old, according to this journal extract, actually lived in that house as well and played on the grounds that are now Sparrow's Nest. So Edward Hall Alderson was one of the top judges in the country at the time, and that this becomes his home. And so Georgina Alderson actually, as a small girl, lived in Sparrow's Nest, as it is today, and she played there amongst the trees, and she would later run away, have all sorts of interesting affairs and fun, eventually marries Lord Salisbury, and he becomes Prime Minister, and she becomes, today we'd call her the First Lady, if you like, if this was America. So there is a connection there between the Marchioness of Salisbury and Lord Salisbury and this other guy here. Everybody is totally forgotten about or never even knew about this connection. Now, this advert appeared on Saturday the 26th of July 1851, and for some reason, we don't know why, the trustees of Robert Sparrow's will decided to sell the property and put it on the market and get rid of it. Here's the advert from the Norfolk Chronicle here. It talks about this marine residence, tastefully erected in is the rustic cottage style and placed at the foot of the cliff, amidst beautifully varied pleasure grounds and plantations at Lowestoft. There's other properties at Ella and Wade Hall, etc. And on the other side here, by 1851, we're told that the marine residence, Sparrow's Nest we'll call it, was actually leased to Lieutenant Colonel William Jones of the 6th Hussars for a term of 21 years at the annual rent of £5. He entered into a covenant with the owners, with the trustees of Robert Sparrow's estate, to expend £700 in repairing, altering and improving the Messwich building and premises, and to keep the same in good order and complete repair. And the lease will expire in Michaelmas 1852, the following year. Actually, by that time, we know that the Honourable Colonel Jones had died and the property was empty, possibly why they decided to sell it. At this time, and in fact prior to that, 4 years earlier, the Reverend William Wheel, Doctor of Divinity, purchased for £320 part of the lands to the north of what's now Sparrow's Nest, and he purchased that green area that you see there, that 3.5-4 acre piece of land there, which eventually would, many years later, would become the Dean's Oval and cricket ground. And this little plot of land, the house, the fish houses, and grounds in the northeastern corner of modern day Sparrow's Nest. And the photograph at the bottom there is looking down the ravine, looking towards the sea. You can see the massive Deans in the background, and you can see that property that the Reverend Wheel purchased in the corner. That's long since gone. And of course, here you can just make out the southern end of this plot of land here. So we're standing up here and we're looking down to the back there. But probably he purchased it because he was also the tenant after the death of Colonel Jones of what would become there, because in 1851 Dawson Turner, one of the trustees of Robert Sparrow, sold all of that land to him. £2,100 he paid for it. So now you can see the green area is basically what would become the Dean's Oval to the north and Sparrow's Nest to the south. Not complete as yet. Wheel purchased it there, and it's described as all that Messuage or tenement, formerly in several tenements. And we know from the deeds that there was once three, it has been divided, the house has been divided into 3 cottages, and now called Cliff Cottage, with the gardens, lawns and pleasure grounds late in the occupation of William Jones and now in the occupation of the said William Wheel. So we've moved on. Dr. William Wheel, he died on the 5th of March 1866 at the age of 71. He was a Doctor of Divinity at Cambridge, and there's still some prize that's awarded at Trinity College every year called, it's named after him anyway. He was quite a big name there. He died very unfortunate circumstances. He was riding from the college back to his house one evening, and the horse got a bit out of control. He was thrown from the carriage, and one of the wheels went over his head and killed the poor gentleman. And so his estates were put up for sale, and here you can see the advert in the Norfolk Chronicle for Cliff Cottage to be sold on. This is the 4th of August 1866, the advert is, and again there's Cliff Cottage going up for sale. And on 2nd of October that same year, Cliff Cottage and the grounds, of course, is purchased from Will's executors by Joseph Davey of Thorpe by Norwich, a silk merchant, for the sum of £1,800. He got it pretty cheap. And so the Davies move in. Here's the 1871 census. The top line, you can see Joseph Davey living at Cliff Cottage. At least I hope you can see it. He's described as a merchant. Living in the house with him are his 2 spinster sisters, 72-year-old Rachel and 56-year-old Margaret, and they're living in Cliff Cottage with 2 servants. 30th of October 1872, Joseph Davey died at Lowestoft, and his estate worth under £30,000 was put into the hands of executors and trustees and held in trust. That left his 2 sisters, Rachel and Margaret, living there. 17th of November 1875, Rachel Davey, his sister, died at Lowestoft, and that left Margaret, the last surviving of the Davey, 3 Davey siblings, living there. And this is a photograph probably taken around about that time. She was only living in the cottage because it belonged to, it'd been left in trust to the trustees, and they actually sold the cottage to Margaret, the sister, for £3,000, the cottage and all the grounds around it, on the 2nd of March 1877. Some of the land at that time belonged to the Lord of the Manor, what had been the wasteland, the common land, and that was held by, they had to pay a rent to the Lord of the Manor. They bought, Margaret, or probably her legal team, purchased the freehold from the Lord of the Manor in on the 15th of December 1880, and the whole estate became freehold. And there's a view of the cottage, probably round about that time. I'm quite intrigued by it. We know from the 1881 census that Margaret was living there with two servants. And if you see a close up here, I think that's her standing in the doorway. That's one of the servants up on the balcony, and that's another one of them standing there. That's the only picture that we have of her. As an aside, if I just take that back one, you can see here, there's this nice conservatory. There, it's said, and there's no reason to dispute it because it's still there today. There was a spring of water that came out of the cliff at that point, and the water was said to be good for people with sore eyes. And Margaret would sell pennyworths of water in small bottles to local people if they came to her door for them to bathe their eyes with the water. And the spring is still there today. Unfortunately, the conservatory is not, neither is the big house, but the spring bubbling out of the cliff at the back is still there if we get a chance. So here we are. As I said, this is, I think, Margaret Davey with her two servants. She died in 1897 on the 27th of March, and this is her obituary. She died worth £11,276, 13 shillings and 10pence, and she was very well thought of. She was a member of the Society of Friends, and they put there, I'm just trying to read, will be greatly missed by the poor. She was quite a philanthropic young lady. As I said, I've never seen a picture of her. She was 83 when she died, and the Cliff Cottage and the small estate, just over 6 acres, plus the 4.5 acres to the north, were put in the hands of the trustees by her will and put on the market. And here you see the sale going up. Lowestoft Journal, 3rd of July, 1897. And it's a very long advert because it's a big estate. So I paraphrased it down here, partly so I don't have to remember it. And then it says, for sale by auction at the public hall Lowestoft in 6 lots. Lot 1, a picturesque, unique marine residence, Cliff Cottage, formerly known as Sparrow's Nest, comprising on the upper floor attics, on the first floor a drawing room with balcony, 7 bedrooms, 2 dressing rooms, a linen room, WC, ground floor an entrance hall, dining room, breakfast room, conservatory, kitchen, scullery, etc., etc. Also stables, a walled-in kitchen garden and gardener's cottage. And there is a never-failing supply by gravitation of the finest spring water from the hills, i.e. the cliff. So that tale about the spring water and Margaret Davey selling certainly there was a spring there. The total area consisted of 5 acres, 3 roads, 3 perches, which is I think about just very, very marginally short of 6 acres. This was purchased by the town council, by Lowestoft Corporation, for £7,200. Also going with it was a valuable piece of building land on the Dean's ground opposite the yacht pond. The yacht pond is gone. That's where Swimming Pool Road now is. For those that are familiar with the area, it contains just over 4 acres and used as allotments. This was also purchased by the corporation, if I can read what it says on screen, for £700. They also purchased 16 cottages with gardens, having a frontage of 141 feet to Watford Road and 244 feet to Lighthouse Score. These lots were also purchased by the council for £1,410. So the council, the town council, the old Lowestoft Borough Council, purchased that whole area from the executives of Margaret Davey for £3,110. And this is what they got for the money. So that's the whole area. Obviously, the area going to the north is not part of Sparrow's Nest today, although it is still another recreational area, the Dean's Oval. So that's what they got for the money. But there's the cottages, the pink area that you can see. They weren't included as part of the park. Those are the terrace of very old cottages on Lighthouse Score, formerly known as Lighthouse Hill. And these are the cottages that have long since gone. They were pulled down in the 1930s, and the council, which of course owned them, they just purchased them in the 1930s, replaced them with council houses, which are now in private ownership. And of course, to the north, there is the allotment gardens under Gunton Cliff, because we crossed into Gunton here, and these were also purchased at the same time. This is the house. Just before the purchase, I should think, you can see the lovely conservatory there. And there was no, so 1897, the council buys up the thing. There is no formal opening of the Sparrow's Nest Estate and Cliff Cottage as a park. They just kind of laid out for things. The Cliff Cottage that you can see in the middle there was actually converted into tea rooms, and here's a picture not taken round about 1900 or just after, once the formal gardens, once the estate has been opened up as you can see on there, it says the Sparrow's Nest, but it's actually Sparrow's Nest. And so that's the start of the park. Everything gets controversial. One of the earliest and first things that the council did, they chopped down so many of those trees and bushes where the lawns now are today. And there was a great outcry from a lot of people in the town for digging them bushes out or chopping them down and carting them away and clearing the area to lay out the lawns that we see today. And it became the place to go for entertainment. It became very, very popular. There was no theatre there was no grand bandstand as there is today, just the tea rooms and coffee shop in the old house, but it became very, very popular. When there was events going on, marquees would be erected. Here's another view of one of the great and the good. You had to pay, I think it was sixpence to get in there. I'm going to quickly run through these. The franchise for supplying the refreshments to sell there was given to Mr. Frank Stebbings. He also organised concert parties and performances there. So it became the place, the Mecca to go. This is from 1898, so it's only a year, the first summer after the estate has been built, and already the Sparrow's Nest park is open. There's Mr. Stebbings in all his glory. Just more views round about not long after the opening of the events that are taking place in the park. This was a high wire act, I understand. Here's another one that I'd love to have seen. I'm going to finish here in a minute. I just need to go through these while they're on there. This is the sensation of the season, a grand military spectacle. In case you can't read it, it's a little bit there. The bombardment and capture of Omdurman, in which, by kind permission of the officers commanding batteries of Royal Artillery and companies of infantry, will take part. The fireworks will be of especially expressive character, concluding with a realistic scene, the bombardment of Omdurman by the Nile gunboats, in which the entire city will be represented in Sparrow's Nest as in flames. Military bands, grand march past the troops, no need to go out of Lowestoft for realistic and sensational war scenes. Thursday evening, 6 o'clock, admission sixpence, children under 12 threepence. And so that's 1898 again. So they're really kicking this off. Nearly got to the end now because we still got one piece of the jigsaw missing. And see, you can see, as I said earlier, there was a little piece of land there, 22nd of February 1724. James Wilde of Lowestoft placed the piece of land in trust to ply the rents of the property towards providing bread for the poor of the town. The house became known as James Wilde's Bread House, and it stood on the site of a later dwelling built in 1828, which now forms part of the Lowestoft Maritime and East Suffolk, the Lowestoft and East Suffolk Maritime Museum, tongue twister there. And it was purchased there, and we're told that it was purchased by the council. And so finally, the park is complete as we know it today. 10th of September 1904, the council paid £412 for this just almost exactly 1 acre piece of land, and they laid it out as bowling greens and tennis courts. And here's the grand opening up the top right. There's the press report telling us all about it. And if I go to the next one, there we are. So we had at the bottom end, I'm sure people can see exactly where this is. On the eastern end, down by Watload Road, there were tennis courts, and at the northern end, by the bank, the grassy bank there, was the bowling green, and it opened in August 1905, formally opened. And of course, there's the churchwarden's cottage that stands on the site of James Wilde's Bread House, and now part of the Maritime Museum, rebuilt in 1828. That's the little sign over the door. And that's the same area today. That's the piece of land that became the last part of the jigsaw of Sparrow's Nest to fall into place. And the bowling greens today, the tennis courts later moved to the Dean's Oval, where they still are today. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the point where I finish. There's a lot more to the story. There's the same amount again to take us right through almost to the present day. I hope you're all there and haven't gone to sleep, and I hope you found something of interest there for you. I'm just going to get up off the floor because that's where I've been sitting. And
well, Ivan, there's certainly people have been enjoying it. I'm going to feature a few comments on screen while you just turn your camera around. And first one is from Sue Day, said, really enjoyed learning about the Anglo-Dutch Wars and Peeps' account of the plague. Thank you so much. Now Sparrow's Nest. Linda Boyce says, this is fascinating. Thank you. Janice Marjoram says, so close to the beach village, but were those that lived there frowned upon by Sparrow's Nest people? Maybe that's one for another time, Ivan.
I would imagine. Oh, sorry, keep on, yeah.
Bridget Allender says, really love hearing about the history of Old Lowestoft. Maggie Clark, very interesting, learnt a lot, thank you. And Carly says, love listening to Ivan talking about Sparrow's Nest and learning about what I didn't know. Thank you. But yeah, sorry, to just go back to Janice's comment, so close to the beach village, but were those that lived there frowned upon by Sparrow's Nest people?
Well, I don't think there are such things as Sparrow's Nest people, but the people who use Sparrow's Nest, judging by those pictures, those photographs taken on these grand open days, and you had to pay to get onto the park, they would be from the middling and upper sections of society. The poor people down on the beach village probably didn't go there very often. I don't think they would have been very welcomed, to be perfectly honest with you. And, that's my take on it. And of course, the interesting thing is as well, when the park first opened, we now have those walks down from the High Street or from Yarmouth Road, the north end of Lowestoft, the entrance there. When it first opened, and for quite a long while, I think even in the 1920s, the only way into the park was from the entrance from Watload Road. There was no top entrance there at all.
Yeah.
So possibly they opened up the top so people didn't have them come along Watload Road and through the beach village to get to there. I don't know. I'm surmising now, but yeah, there must have been a reason why they decided they ought to have an entrance at the top, particularly when the possibly when the trams came, 1903, I think it was, or was it 02? Anyway, the trams come, then later the buses. You can get right up there, and you haven't got to walk down through Cart Score or Lighthouse Score to get into the park. You can get in from the top. Plus, you haven't got to go through the smelly beach village neither.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there you go, Janice. That's Ivan's thoughts on that, and then a few more comments. Carol Fisher says, "Thank you." Chris Collins says, "Brilliant. Didn't know much of that. Thank you very much." And Jackie says, "We'll see it in a different light when I next visit Sparrow's Nest."
Good.
Well, so we're kind of finished for this evening. It's not too late to click share if you haven't yet already done so. Really appreciate you kind of tuning in, but you can kind of help us to reach more people by clicking share. And as I say, it's not too late to do that because this video will be available to watch after the live broadcast finishes. So hopefully, Ivan, are you up for it again, same time next week?
Yeah, definitely. And as I say, like I said last time, last Monday, if anybody wants to leave messages out there after we finish with suggestions of anything they'd like me to touch on in the history of the town, that gives me something to work on as well. If not, I can always do as well. I'm going to chuck some little brick backs of my own in, like I did this evening about Peeps and what have you. But I could, if you wanted, finish a part of the evening, finish the second half of this talk, because there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that sounds great. But as Ivan has said, if there's a particular aspect of Lowestoft's history that you'd like him to talk about, then he'd be very happy to do that. Just let us know in the comments or message the page afterwards. But so I think we're almost done. A couple of more comments. Thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Ivan. Very interesting as usual. But just a reminder that if you're available tomorrow evening, please tune into our Shanty sessions, 7:30 p.m. Plus we've got special guests will be the London Sea Shanty Collective, fantastic group, and then Paul and myself as usual. And as I said, you can still watch this after we've finished. You can still share it. And as always, thank you very much to all the knowledge that Ivan has and is willing to share. And we'll just play out with this then. So this is actually a
say thank you to everybody as well for watching, and come back again next week. And thank you, Steve, for organising it.
Not at all. Not at all. My pleasure. I'm actually just going to play out just on our credits. This is a song that Paul and myself put together with John and Lynn Ward. This has not been played anywhere, I don't think. And this is actually about the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The nefarious life of Margaret Catchpole. So this is it.